All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome and good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever it is you're tuning in from. Thank you so much for joining us virtually today. I'm Hayla Alawi, and on behalf of Atmosphere Press, I am so pleased to welcome you to today's reading of new historical fiction from the press. We'll be hearing from Daniel McKenzie, reading from the Seaforth Saga, Book 2, Wolves and Empires, released May 28th. Francis M. Flavin, reading from Book One of the Alyeska Chronicles, The Muse in a Time of Madness, which was released July 23rd, just yesterday. And Natalie Musgrave Dossett, reading from Sarita, a novel, which is releasing September 10th. All three authors' books can be purchased both from online retailers and from select bookstores. And of course, you can order the books on Atmosphere Press's website. That's at atmospherepress.com/books. I'm also going to put those links directly in the chat for you all. At the end of today's event, we are going to have time for audience questions. So during the readings, if you think of a question for one or more of our authors, please feel free to type that in the chat and I'll make sure they get asked. And then during the actual reading itself, please stay muted so we can keep extraneous sound at a minimum. Of course, in addition to questions, you can always use that chat for any praise and comments. One last note is that we at Atmosphere Press appreciate your support today and always. If you have a manuscript of your own, we would love to read it, so submit your work today to books@atmospherepress.com. Again, thank you so much for tuning in and supporting Dan, Francis, and Natalie today. We're going to start off with our first reader, who is Daniel McKenzie. Dan is a writer of short stories, prose, and poetry, drawing from education and life experiences. He listened to his Lipan Apache grandmother's tales and myths of her American Indian matricircular tradition and history, thus Tales of Ultimate Resolution. Dan's poetry has been published in San Francisco, and his writings were included as a chapter in an anthology of his dear late friend, Jan Kerouac. In Wolves and Empires, which we'll be hearing from today, Captain Lucien Dumaine is directed to France by the Orthodox Church in an alliance with His Red Eminence the Cardinal on the political chessboard. The captain immediately sails to Europe, where he receives a grand welcome, while the Cardinal orders his new privateers to sail and pirate in the Caribbean. We'll hear more of the story now from Dan.
All right, here we go. Here we are, yes. Okay, I'm going to begin with a commentary by a dear friend. It's a translator of Scandinavian and Germanic languages. She was the first of one of my readers to finish everything, and it's short and sweet. Few have expressed the tumultuous rise and fall of civilizations, the epic adventures and long journeys through time and history, better than poets of the ancient and modern times. Daniel McKenzie is of the latter writers and poets, with his 4-volume saga Seaforth. As a storyteller, Mr. McKenzie is granted the power to tell his story with a certain forcefulness and acumen in prose and poetry of the ancient storytellers. This classic tale of love, war, and survival amidst the reaches of empires in the 17th century bears meaning for us in the 21st century. I've chosen to read, because of the action and adventure and enduring love story of the 4 novels, I've chosen to read an idle time, a time of relaxation, moored hidden in the Philippine Islands, awaiting word for the next movement. I call it a bygone afternoon. I toast to love and me mates that tempt the capricious hand of fate. Ho, my friends, it's getting late. So here's to you and here's to me. I tip me cup to all of ye. The companions raise their cups in salute to Kevin Penhaligon, with the ladies now coming on board, drying from swimming and sweating almost instantly from the heat. When dressed, do you ladies care to join us for a drink? Kevin asked. The Fräulein von Margraf shouted over, give us a moment. The bells of the Vengeance came forth, barely covered, with wet hair combed back, looking fresh as wildflowers after rain in this land of unknown bouquet, and sat with wet, clinging coverings. Marlene, where's Theron? I summoned him. The Captain Lucian Demain, the wolf of the Aegean, asked. I left him quietly sharpening his blades. He said he'd be here shortly. Ah, mademoiselles at Gentle Holmes, we've simply to await Captain An of the Woku, and we'll know one way or another our immediate future. Shall we have another drink? The captain suggested as he lit his Nepalese pipe. Lucian, have you thought about the silk once we've finished in the Philippine waters? Ariel asked, looking to Seaforth and Nancine call the joyful widows under whose contract we are sailing seeking silk. When we finish sacking the Intramuros, if fortunate, I'll acquire with on where to purchase silk or steal the fabric, but filling our holes, which I intend to do with the commodity the joyful widows desire for their salon in Paris. Or we find what we're looking for and take in Manila and carry on to Japan and China, the wolf answered. Zev, is there not a sanction on Western trade ships allowed into Japan, let alone being able to moor? Ariel questioned. We are not Christian, or any other damned absurd fable. The Captain An told me of the closed ports, and of course it has to do with what else? The control of the state with invading perfunctory heathen religion. Namely, the Japanese state wanted no more outside interference from Christianity. The Roman religion, having come to Japan brought by the Portuguese, immediately tried to begin the coercion of fear, using their standards of guilt, repression, and damnation, but with instant atonement. And the shogun put a halt to the sedition. The pleasantry of Japan had begun selling their souls to greedy priests for redemption and for the aberrant Pope's treasury. That insane Hierophant had squandered, as the despot said. They had made us Pope. Shall we not have a good time? And the wolf howled. In a moment of rare melodious voice was heard, Forgive my indulgence, Lord Aeneas. I, Theron, took a seat. The Lady Seaforth and Mistress Nancine were startled at the beautiful appearance of the wolf scribe and operative assassin. They had never seen this man close, save only in the shadows. Deep, classic, violet eyes, with the narrow, exquisite, perfect face, and my aquiline nose so depicted beautifully by the great artisans of sculpture. It was as if time stood still. My presence was that of an Olympian coming to sit with his fellow gods at the table of Zeus Pater, and, as always, I am still quite vain, enjoying the adoration. I, Theron, my voice melodic, if singing the song of a balladeer or troubadour, a serene serenade descended upon the company. The joyful widows marveled in seeing this assassin in the bright sun. Here was a night creature, beautifully resplendent in the light, with an open ottoman shirt and no blades at his belt, seated regally at center, like the shade Thanatos amongst the living. I was a ghost whom they honored in love and dread, and von Margraf took my hand and held it tightly clasped. Have you noticed, dear ones, the song of the luminous waters today concerning our paradise? Singing to Demeter and Persephone in praise, this comely noontide lapping gently our ship and shore, I, the ephemeral hunter of dark magnificence, stunning beauty, and cunning unmatched, bestowed poetically. All were spellbound by my ancient, inflective, exquisite voice. Friends, I speak in the same gentility of ocean whispered, murmuring like a lover against the sides of the Spartan fleet, when finally moored at Troy to begin the endless siege. Brave Archelaus and clever Odysseus and the Trojan Hector, tamer of horses, with his wife, the ever-weeping Andromache, heard the same fragrant sound in the prehistoric dawn before the walls of Ilium and the waters of the Aegean in destiny. You see, we, the whole of humanity, is stunned with the brevity of birth in this dangerous, beautiful place, this unimaginable planet, seeking safety and no surprise above all else. I said quietly, smiling. 'Twas not for Helen choosing love, but the greed of Agamemnon of Mycenae and the Spartan fleet came to Troy for the massive treasure to be taken, and the Greek pirates heard the war horn of Ares, god of war. That would sound for 10 years, beginning the Battle of Troy's topless towers to burn, until finally the golden keep of Priam's treasure house was achieved to satiate the avarice of men. Are we not that Spartan fleet going about our work in these foreign waters? Beware the Trojan bearing poems, Ariel said. Laughing seductively, I simply replied, Touche, my practical Ariel, yet when I remove the last enemy of the wolf of the Aegean, it will be said thus, taken from the field was a foolish minion of greed. Brave Aeneas will, in an instant, remove his armor forever, with Creusa found and saved, and I, Theron, winked at the captain, then smiled into the eyes and actually touched the Lady Seaforth's hand. Are we not the same? Equal in death's quiet thievery and a cause for right according to our descriptions? But let us talk of sweeter life and the moments of the day and the hour's gift of our lives in this peaceful myrrh embrace of our mother of all, this gazing moment of moments, finally, and respite from the toils of destiny. You speak of freedom, Alexandro called Paris, the captain said in awe of my rare greeting and prophetic chanson. It is the gate we will all pass one day under the vanishing sun, moon, and star, and in that exquisite moment of courage enter into ultimate freedom. I regard that coming day as do you, Lucian, the lovely perfumed emissaries of infinity, for I too await the little darlings with avid expectation. Theron was referring to a statement the wolf once made. If woman is the emissary to hell and oblivion, as the Roman religion has decreed in their war against the feminine, and so be it. I love the little darlings. Take me home, my sweet Lady Seaforth. The hours whiled away, drinking and hashisha in a day of poetry, stories, and observations of the moment. The views of the Bonaventure were discussed, voyaging on unknown waters, until the evening came on the dusky wings of moth's sultry flight. The moon high, we retired to our sleep and to our dreams.
Thank you very much, Dan. And thank you for kind of setting the scene and giving us all these kind of details that really created this picture, especially with things like the Hashisha. So that was a great reading. Thank you.
Well, I need my
Reading.
autograph now. Can I go outside and smoke it?
I've definitely heard that before. All right. So reading
Just
next
returned.
today.
My friends
I'm
have just
sorry.
returned. My friends have just returned from Russia and Turkey, and I asked Jeffrey, he's a Academy Award winner, stage, scenic designer, all that. I said, "What'd you do, man?" He goes, "I smoked the hookah the whole time."
Yeah, I mean, it's a big thing, right?
Salute.
Okay. So reading next today is Francis M. Flavin. Francis is a poet and writer, originally from rural upstate New York. He has now lived extensively in Alaska, Colorado, Nevada, and the Philippines. His writing draws upon his experience as an educator, hockey player, fish and game field worker, public interest lawyer, governmental investigator, and adventurer on 4 continents. He has also been a successful advocate for civil and indigenous rights. Francis's written work appears in Poetry Quarterly, Beyond Words Literary Magazine, Inwood, Indiana, Blue Line, Pacific Review, Moonstone Arts Center, La Piccioletta Barca, Three Line Poetry, The Closed Eye Open, Tempered Runes, and The Plentitudes, among others. He was the winner of the 2021 Poetry Quarterly Rebecca Lard Award and has received recognition for humor and flash fiction, short story, novel excerpt, creative nonfiction, and personal essay categories in the Soul Making Kate's Literary Competition, the social impact category of the Chicagoland Poetry Contest, the Partisan Press Working People's Poetry Competition, and the personal essay and rhymed poetry categories of the 2020 Writer's Digest Awards. Today, we'll be hearing Francis read from the Muse in a Time of Madness. It's a timeless tale of self-discovery, of love and freedom lost and regained. It's a chronicle of sacrifice and determination. In the story, Peter is influenced by a beautiful and mystical muse who warns of impending dangers and guides them ever eastward. This once sheltered and sensitive icon artist becomes a leader and warrior to protect his sister, his love, and the remnants of Novgorodian society. And now, Francis, welcome to the virtual stage.
Thank you, Hala. First of all, I want to thank Atmosphere Press. Their team is fantastic, and Hala is the most fantastic in the team. I would be totally lost without her. I could sum up my knowledge of publications and marketing with one word: zero. And so it's nice. Also, I have a thunderstorm around, and sometimes we lose our internet here when there's thunder and lightning. And if I get struck by thunder, I'm sure I see my friends Bob and Peggy up there, and they can probably help sneak me by the pearly gates. And a quick note to Daniel. Daniel, my oldest son is Zaran, and so he may be very interested in your book with your character. Okay, that said, let's get started. Madness had a name, and death was his countenance. Dressed in black with dog heads on the saddles, an exorable wave of armed riders swept toward the sleeping city. Cloaked in darkness, they brought his message, and that message was terror. But there was another messenger present that fateful night. Ephemeral in delivery and enigmatic in form, her message would reverberate through the ages. Novgorod, Russia, January 2nd, 1570. Old souls, those who explore the boundaries of perceived reality and the shadow realms of possibilities, may find their muse. If their mind is receptive and their spirit pure, she will guide them. The shaman, the artist, the dreamer. In the spirit land between slumber and awake, the sense of menace was palpable. The air was heavy with expectation, peril, and promise where a heartbeat away. In the lake, the swans were clearly agitated as they swam in tight circles with their heads bobbing. They nervously watched a small grove of birch trees on the far shore. The birches were packed tightly on an island of high ground in an expanse of muskeg that extended a short distance back from the lake. Beyond the muskeg was a long, low ridge covered with magenta flowers, a vivid swath of color against the dark boreal forest that receded into the distance. Movement at the edge of the birches sent the swans into a trumpeting retreat. The sound of their powerful wings beating the water rumbled down the lake as they struggled aloft. Two men and a woman silently emerged from the trees onto the shore. Dressed in tanned hides, they moved with the grace of forest people. The figures were dark complexioned like Tatars, but unlike Tatars, they were tall and slender. They lacked an aura of menace that usually attended the Tatars, no matter how small the group or peaceful the setting. The woman was nothing less than angelic. Her very countenance stirred a desire deep within him. He felt himself irresistibly drawn to her. She moved away from the men and cupped her hands to her mouth to call. At first he could not hear her through the breeze that rustled through the overhead branches. He moved closer to the edge of the forest. She cupped her hands and called again. This time he heard her, faintly at first, Peter, then louder, Peter. Peter Alexandrovich Safaronov, wake up. Peter struggled to sit up, his mind reeling from lack of sleep and the effects of the fine French wine that had gone down all too smoothly only hours before. His mother used his full name when she wanted his complete attention, when he was in trouble. Only this time it wasn't his mother. She was visiting in Lithuania with his father, a blessing as he was about to discover. Matrona, what is it that compels you to turn my dreams into nightmares? I just got to sleep. Can't it wait until tomorrow? Even in the dim candlelight, the frightened look in his sister's eyes told him it could not. I won't try the female voice. I tried that once playing Margaret Thatcher, and my voice was ruined for a week, and my ankles were ruined from the high heels. No, Peter, I'm afraid you will not smile in your dreams for a long time. Ivan the Holy Tsar of Russia is approaching Novgorod with an army of Opraniki. His mission here is undoubtedly neither peaceful nor holy. Grozny, Peter growled, this Russian epithet for the Tsar with bitter loathing and contempt. The literal translation of dread or awesome seemed particularly suited to the temperament of this Tsar, with his predilection for violence and cruelty. I knew it would come to this, little sister. It's the damned Operniki. They want to control Novgorod like the rest of Russia. They continually feed the Tsar's paranoia with rumors and lies. The Tsar was Ivan Vasilovich, Ivan IV, or Ivan the Terrible, as he was now known throughout Russia and the rest of Europe and Asia Minor, a title that was well deserved due to the ingenious and hideous methods of torture he used on his enemies. Hurry, Peter. Andrei Stepanov is waiting at the entryway. We need to leave Novgorod now. Peter had never seen such fear and panic in his sister's face, but I thought Andrei was on the way to Moscow with Dmitri and the trade delegation. The Vechi had selected several key Novgorodian artisans and merchants to open a dialogue with the authorities in the capital, perhaps even the Tsar himself. It was hoped that with increased communication between the two cities, some of the suspicion and intrigue would dissipate, and the ever-increasing levels of taxation would be stemmed and eventually rolled back. He was, but some of their horses had wandered into the forest. Excuse me. Andrei and Dmitri went to retrieve them. On their return, they found the Tsar's men butchering their encampment. Choking back sobs, she fought for control. Only the darkness and Lux saved them. Oh, Peter. Peter took her in his arms and softly stroked her hair in a vain attempt to calm her. Andrei, at the entryway, remained agitated as well. I'm afraid we have little time for consolation and solace. Operniki have sacked every town and village between Kilna and here. This was a distance of over 260 versts. They will soon cordon off the entire city, and we will be sailed in to receive whatever punishment Grozny wishes to visit upon us. Lately, he has taken to frying his subjects alive in a giant pan. I do not wish to participate in this activity, nor would I wish it upon my worst enemy. What about Dmitri? Peter asked. Her fiancé, Andrei's brother, had been one of the artisans selected for the delegation. Dmitri has gone on to Yaroslavl to secure a sanctuary for you and Matrona, as well as any other lawyers we can save, Andrei replied. To this end, I must be on my way. There are many at risk tonight. In order to prevent a warning, the Operniki are slaying anyone that can give notice. I am that warning. Andrei paused and looked directly into Peter's eyes. Like a good many Novgorod citizens, Andrei had a substantial amount of Tatar blood in his veins. With his swarthy complexion and fierce black eyes, few would challenge his ancestry or opinions. Saint Alexander Nevsky, the Prince of Novgorod, who was canonized by the Russian Orthodox Church in 1547, had submitted to the rule of Mongol overlords 3 centuries ago. While to this day it was considered a controversial act, Nevsky averted needless bloodshed and led the way to increased commerce with the Tatar Empire. Since that time, Novgorod accepted those of Tatar blood more willingly than most cities in Russia. Indeed, like Andrei, a goodly number of the citizens of Novgorod carried Tatar blood in their veins. I would leave now, my friend, Andrei counseled Peter. Only by taking seldom used trails and byways was I able to avoid capture and execution. Death is on my heels, and I fear that I am too late to do much good. Meet us in the cathedral in Yaroslavl. Speak only to Father Ivanov. With that, he was out the door. We must leave Peter now. Katrina was clearly shaken, and her voice trembled in fear. Please, she sobbed. Peter's first instinct was to resist his sister's plea. We must fight these beasts, Matrona. First, we must spread the alarm. We can rally the people at St. Sophia's. Let us go toll the church bells there. These lackeys dressed in black with their dog's head saddles may rule the night like the curs that they are, but we can make a stand in the morning. Brother, there is no time to organize a force to fight them. Surely God will protect us from these devils, he replied, with more hope than conviction. No, Peter, God was not on the road to Novgorod. I doubt he is here now. We have no army, we have no weapons, we have no time. We must go. Great sobs shook her tiny body as she struggled, as she tugged frantically at her nightshirt. Pushing her gently away, Peter crossed himself. Do not blaspheme, little sister. God has not yet abandoned us. It must have been divine guidance that inspired our father to prepare for this day. I thought he was foolish and weak. I see now that it was I who was stupid. Peter's father, Alexei, had feared a military campaign by the Tsar against Novgorod. He had prepared a family contingency plan in the event the Operniki attacked the city. Peter had argued that Catholic Poland and Lithuania would protect Novgorod in such an eventuality, a view shared by his brother, Nikolai, and most of the citizens of Novgorod. Alexei, however, was convinced that Novgorod's ties to its allies were purely commercial. No Catholic blood would be shed for Orthodox souls. Novgorod and Petskov would be on their own. Peter and Nikolai had half-heartedly joined in their father's contingency activities, more out of affection for the man than respect for his views. Now his planning and logistics would be tested. Father has planned for this raid, Matrona. Check the bridge often. When the Operniki devils arrive, they will undoubtedly come over the bridge. The Safarnos household was situated on a hill in the Sophinsky area of the city, named by the great cathedral St. Sophia. A house was located just outside the citadel that enclosed the cathedral and the archbishop's palace within imposing stone walls. It stood above the commercial section of the city to the east. The commercial area was connected by the side Velikov Bridge. The number of windows in the house was limited, and they were small to cut down on the heat loss during the bitterly cold Russian winters. However, there were two windows that gave a view of the bridge, one in the living room and one in Peter's room. Taking Matrona by the arm, Peter returned to his room, lit a candle, and emptied the contents of a large wooden trunk in the corner of the room onto his bed. In the trunk were jewelry, a large sum of rubles, and sufficient tattered clothing to outfit the entire Safarnov family. He tossed a bundle of clothes to Matrona. Here, wear enough of this for protection against the cold, and take several changes for the road. The Operniki will be looking for warriors, not Tatars. I think I'll end it there. So the book is part of a chronicle called the Alyeska Chronicles. It begins in 1570 in Russia and ends in modern day Alaska. Alyeska being an old word for Alaska. It's derived from a Aleut word, Alyeska, which meant land where the sea breaks, and later became the Great Lands. So this is book one of the Chronicles. Hopefully I live that long to get the end done. But thank you all for participating, and thanks especially to my friends and relatives who showed up, and the other folks who aren't friends and relatives that put up with me for the last 14 minutes. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Francis. That was really a great reading to give us a sense of the characters and the landscape, really, which I think is part of what's so compelling about this book and ongoing it will be in the series. So yeah, thank you so much for that. Our final reader for today is Natalie Musgrave Dossett. Natalie grew up in San Antonio, spending a great deal of time on family ranches in deep South Texas. A seventh-generation Texan, she was raised on tales, some of them tall, of the Wild Horse Desert, a place her great-grandmother referred to as an acquired taste. Her love of history and writing was nurtured by wonderful teachers at St. Mary's Hall and strengthened while earning a BA in history at Vanderbilt University. She lives in Dallas and enjoys a large, growing family with her husband. Today, we'll be hearing from the novel Sarita. In the summer of 1920, Sarita's younger brother bleeds to death in her arms after being shot by a ruthless tequila smuggler. Sarita is stunned when the Texas Rangers refuse to help. She knows her father yearns for justice, but he is too ill and weak to seek it. Sarita isn't. Natalie, take it away.
Thank you, Hala. And I want to echo Francis and thank you for all your guidance and support. And I'm going to start at the beginning. The manufacture, sale, or transportation of intoxicating liquors imported or exported from the United States is prohibited. The 18th Amendment went into effect at midnight on January 16, 1920. Seldom has a law been so extraordinarily difficult to enforce or so flagrantly violated. Chapter 1. Sunlight shifted through the oak canopy above, golden rays glistening on my fingers, slick with blood and gloved in small brown and gray feathers. I picked up another quail from the pile at my feet, popping the head off and snapping the fragile wing bones. As I plucked it clean, small tufts of down sailed away like dandelion seeds, floating with the buzz of locusts and grasshoppers on the summer breeze. The lazy sound reminded me of childhood naps in the shade of the big live oak behind our house, of waking up in a hazy sweat to Mama's dinner call. My mother lay buried under that tree now, and everything had changed. Holding the bird's stiff feet in one hand, I pinched the film of skin around its thigh and peeled it away from the shiny meat underneath. A triangle of shotgun pellets pocked the rose-tinted breast, tiny copper cannonballs that had folded the bird mid-flight and sent it diving to the ground. I picked them out and turned the headless body over to scoop up the wormy intestines, dropping them onto a small mound of guts on the ground. Coyotes were probably circling already, nosing the wind. I finished cleaning the birds and shoved them into a burlap sack, wiped my hands on the back of my canvas trousers, already soiled from a full day of ranch chores. Gathering my gear, I walked over to Buster. The horse had wandered to the edge of a watering hole, grazing on sparse stalks of buffalo grass, not yet burnt crisp by the July sun. As I pushed the .410 shotgun into the saddle scabbard, I paused, sensing a subtle change in the air. The insects had fallen silent. Even the chortling of the white-winged doves roosting in the high branches had stopped. The hair on the back of my neck prickled. Buster raised his head, swiveling his ears. Turning in a circle, I searched the heat-wobbled horizon. The surrounding mesquite thicket stood waist-high, not tall enough to hide a horsebacker, but several nearby oak mottes, like the one I stood in, could provide plenty of cover for someone wanting to keep out of sight. A chill ran down my arms despite that near 100-degree temperature, the 4 miles to our house seeming to grow longer. A minute or so passed before the insect noise stutter started back up. Buster let out a snort, nudging my hip. He was ready to head home to the bucket of oats waiting in the barn. Whatever had caused the hush, a bobcat, a fox, it must have passed. I nudged the bird sack into the saddlebags, threw the reins over Buster's head and swung up onto his back. Tapping my heels against his sides, we moved out of the tree cover toward the road home. I tried to shake the feeling of being watched. On his morning rounds, Papa had discovered 4 cut fences and a butchered heifer way up at the north pens, which had me jumpy. He'd taken some ranch hands there to mend the holes and round up the straying cattle. Barbed wire might have put an end to the open range for livestock, but trespassers only needed a good pair of wire cutters. There'd been a surge of activity over the past several months, news of some sort of trouble arriving like the hot Gulf breeze, unwanted and inevitable. The threats of cattle rustlers, bandits, and thieves had always existed, but since Prohibition had gone into effect, tequila smugglers had been added to the mix. They seemed particularly brazen, taking what they wanted as they crossed ranches north of the Rio Grande, heading to San Diego to sell their loads. I urged Buster into a gallop, zigzagging through the scrub. As we came over a small rise, my breath caught. A rider was leading an extra horse down the middle of the road. I yanked the reins back, reaching automatically for my gun, then got a better look and settled back in the saddle. My younger brother sat astride a little dapple gray horse he was breaking in. When he saw me, he pulled up. "Hey," he called. His colt pranced impatiently at the end of a lead rope attached to his saddle horn. Twister had been JJ's payment for working out remuda of wild mustangs for the neighboring Arrowhead Ranch. He didn't go anywhere without him. He'd have let Twister sleep by his bed if Papa would have allowed it. "You headed home?" I asked, trotting up beside him. "Not yet. I need to work her a while longer," JJ replied, referring to the young mare he rode. "They want her ready for roundup next week, and she's still pretty squirrely." As if to prove him right, the Mustang skipped sideways, throwing her head up and down like an impatient child. "Whoa there, Bluebird," he soothed, patting her neck. We'd both been riding since almost before we could walk, but JJ had a way with horses. Some even called it a gift. He'd earned quite a reputation, breaking wild mustangs and busting broncos even grown men had given up on. The problem was that all JJ ever wanted to do was work horses. Our father didn't mind the extra money it brought in, so long as JJ's ranch chores got done, which they never did, at least not by him. His gift was my curse. "You better be back before Papa gets home," I said. "You've got chores and I'm done covering for you." Yeah, I know. His eyes fell on the top of the bird sack sticking out of my saddlebag. How many'd you get? 12 shots, 12 birds. Guess that's supper then, he said. JJ leaned over to scratch the white star marking the colt's forehead as Twister nibbled at his leg. You treat that horse like an overgrown puppy, I remarked. JJ grinned. He's 100 times better than any dumb old dog. Despite myself, his love for Twister touched my heart. He'd smiled more in the 2 weeks since he'd brought the colt home than he had in the whole 2 years since Mama had died. Must be nice messing around with ponies all day, I teased, slapping the flap of my saddlebag closed. I, on the other hand, have got to get home and do some real work. You got no idea what you're talking about. JJ's blue eyes scowled at me from under his dove gray Stetson. Saddle breaking Mustangs is real work. Real or not, I shot back, training other people's horses has got nothing to do with our ranch, which is what you should be concerning yourself with. He rolled his eyes, as sick of this argument as I was. In my heart, I wished my father would give in and teach me the cattle operation. I was better suited to it than JJ, and Papa needed the help. He'd had 2 more bad spells over the last several months. Dr. Andrew had told him his heart was getting weak and he needed to cut back, but he was too damn stubborn to listen. Sooner or later, you're going to have to learn how to run La Bernina like Papa wants, I said. You're 13 already, and he can't work as hard as he used to. JJ sighed and yanked off his hat, running a hand through sweat-damp hair that had grown so long it curled below his ears. You're pissed no matter what I do. You've been mad ever since Jackson left, he said, not looking me in the eye. It ain't my fault he cut and run. Anger crept up my neck. Jackson had vanished about a year ago, 2 weeks after he'd asked me to marry him. No one had heard from him since. For a while, it had been good fodder for gossip. Did something happen to him? Did he get cold feet? Eventually, people found other things to talk about. In spite of all my efforts, though, it still hurt. It's isn't, not ain't, and you need a haircut before people mistake you for a girl, I snapped, glaring down until a frown pulled at his mouth. See, I can say hurtful things too. Sorry, he mumbled. Bluebird bounced forward like she was playing hopscotch. JJ shoved his Stetson on and pulled his reins in. We done? She's getting antsy. Guess so. Don't go too far off and don't be late. Yes, ma'am, Miss Sarita. He smirked in a sing-song voice. Ignoring his taunt, I kicked Buster into a canter. I didn't enjoy bossing JJ around any more than he liked me doing it, but Mama's death had put me in charge of running the house and raising him, whether either of us wanted it that way or not. I reached the house pasture and unhooked the latch to the wooden gate. It swung open, old rusty hinges groaning the way Papa did first thing in the morning. I didn't bother to dismount and drag the gate closed, since JJ should be back soon. Buster made a beeline for the big oak doors of the barn, which stood open like 2 arms waiting to embrace the smallest breath of air. After dismounting, I pulled the shotgun out of its scabbard, leaning it against the wall, then yanked the birds out of the saddlebags. A pack of black horseflies appeared as soon as I set the bag down, circling like miniature buzzards. I rolled the top of the burlap tighter, then unsaddled Buster and put the rig away in the tack room. After he ate a handful of oats, I walked him out to the corral. He nickered a greeting to the other cow pony in the pen on his way to the water trough. As I dragged the gate closed, several loose boards shook along the bottom. Fixing them was on JJ's to-do list. I glanced down the road past the gate, surprised to see dust boiling up in front of the brush line less than half a mile away. Maybe JJ would actually be home in time to get some work done. I stepped up on a stump, shading my eyes to get a better look. Bluebird materialized in front of the dirt cloud, galloping flat out. JJ bobbed in the saddle with her motion, reins held high. Twister sprinted behind them, long, slender legs flying, loose lead ropes sailing next to him. JJ never worked a Greenbroke horse that hard, and running the colt down the uneven, graveled road could damage his young bones. JJ slapped Bluebird's hip with the end of the reins, urging her even faster. Alarm snaked around my chest as the screen of dust behind them parted and 2 riders charged out. JJ wasn't running. He was being chased. I raced for the barn, grabbed the 410 and thumbed the safety off. The riders thundered through the open gate as I came out. I raised the shotgun to my shoulder and pointed it at the strangers. They were more than 20 yards away, but they caught sight of the gun and pulled back. JJ rode up next to me and yanked hard on the reins. The mare skidded to a stop, hooves spraying pebbles, as Twister crashed into her backside. Tequileros, he yelled, leaping out of the saddle. A tremble ran the length of my spine. I gripped the gun tighter. Get behind me, I said, fighting to keep my voice even. JJ balked and reached for the 410, but I swung it away from him. For once, do as I say. Chest heaving, he grabbed Bluebird's reins, then reached out to catch the lead dangling from Twister's halter. The excited colt stamped his feet, throwing his head up and down, nostrils flaring. Buenas tardes, señorita, one of the smugglers called out. You can put the gun down. We just want the horses. Amusement tinged his deep voice, but his hand rested on a revolver holstered at his hip. A black cowboy hat sat pushed back on his head, exposing a hard, lean face. Thick stubble covering his chin matched the red color of the hair sticking out from under his hat. It was his eyes, though, that held my attention, glowing pale and cold, like a coyote's did in the moonlight. The straw sombrero the other man wore cast a shadow down to the fringe of his bleached-out mustache. A tangled white beard fluttered to his waist. His slender body leaned over the saddle horn, making him seem old and frail compared to his partner, but the gun belt and revolver on his waist made him just as dangerous. I sucked in air and placed a finger on the trigger. Go away, or I'll shoot. Ah, señorita, for a pretty girl, you are not very polite, sneered the man in the black hat. We will leave, I assure you, but we are taking the horses. I told you, mister, JJ blurted out, you ain't taking my horse. The red-haired smuggler slid his revolver out in one smooth gesture, aiming it at JJ. I swallowed hard. I'd lost my advantage in a split second, no longer the only one pointing a gun.
Thank you so much, Natalie. I
Thank
feel very tense, I have to say. But thank you so much for presenting that reading to us. That was really, really dynamic and a really great way to introduce us to the story. So at this point, we do have time for our audience Q&A. So if anyone in the audience has a question for one or more of their authors, or our authors, please go ahead and put those in the chat and I'll make sure they get asked. We do have a question to start for all three of you. This person says, when did you first become interested in writing historical fiction? So maybe we can go in reading order. So Dan, do you want to start us off with this one?
Always enjoyed playing around with a pencil, especially drumming it when I was bored. However, I was asked to put together the junior high school talent show along with the author Tommy Harris. Went to school with him, Silence of the Lambs, and he and I put together the. It turned out to be a pretty good talent show for the 7th graders and 8th graders, and I could get to school that way. I wasn't interested. I preferred poetry.
Wow, that's quite a jump then from poetry to a whole saga. So yeah, I
Yeah,
can
it was. I have to throw this in. My late wife in a dream and said, "Look at this." And I looked at a podium and I saw everything. And next morning I started writing a book instead of, which I prefer again, poetry.
Right. Yeah. Well, different kind of
Better late than
roots.
never. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. What about you, Francis? Where did you, or when did your interest in historical fiction begin? Or writing historical fiction, I should say.
Thanks, Hala. I was always a Michener and Rutherford fan. And when I was in Alaska, I was doing legal work for Alaska Native peoples, and particularly in regard to land rights of Native peoples that were under Russian domination. And I read an article about a settlement that was found in the early 1930s in Kenai Peninsula, Alaska, that looked to be a Russian settlement that went back to the late 1500s, which was a couple of hundred years before Vitus Bering showed up, and what's generally considered the first contact between Russia and what later became Russia, America. So, and there was some speculation that they may have been refugees of some sort. So I put those two thoughts together to bring the refugees from Novgorod to Alaska with some legal implications in present day Alaska. So that's where that started.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, it's interesting to see when that comes from real and close by historical roots, and putting a story to that. So
I wouldn't, if any other budding authors, I wouldn't start off with historical fiction. Got to do about 5 hours of research for 5 minutes of writing. So I'm sure Daniel will agree.
It's stacked on top of my printer.
yeah, I've never attempted to write historical fiction, and I have to say it seems daunting to me for that reason. But what about you, Natalie? Where did your interest in writing historical fiction stem from?
Well, I've always been interested in history and in writing, and I don't know that I put the two together and added fiction until I took a creative writing class at SMU here in Dallas, and when prompted to write, this is sort of what came out. So, and I love the research part, but as Frances said, it's very easy to go down a rabbit hole, and all of a sudden you've done 10 days of research for about 2 sentences. But I like that part. I have notebooks full of it.
That's definitely good to hear then. I feel like that means the research going in is really quality if you're enjoying it. So, kind of a related question actually for you, Natalie, specifically. This person says, you are from Texas and that's where your book is set. So, did any of the story come from personal or family history?
Yeah, that's a great question. In fact, it's based on true events, and a lot of things in the book are things that happen on our family's ranch, which is way down South Texas. So absolutely it did, and things that I had heard growing up, stories my dad told, stories my grandparents told. My great grandfather was a Texas Ranger, so lots of stories about him. So yes, a lot of it was inspired by and stolen from real events.
Yeah, I'll have to admit I was wondering that myself. So I'm really interested to hear that, it's coming from this background and this tradition of storytelling. So I'm sure that's really embedded throughout the story. We've got another question. This is specifically for Dan. Was it easier for you to write the first book or the second book? Now that you've finished both of them, which one do you think was easier to write, if any?
All 4 books, all 4 novels flowed all together. That's all I can say. And I have a switch in my head. I don't know what writer's block is. I turn that switch on and there it goes. And I'll sit in front of a computer for 20 hours, not even eat.
Yeah, it's those, I've definitely been in that hyperfixation mode with writing before, so
Yeah, it's
totally
like,
relatable.
and then begins the editing of a poem, which is never ending. Along with,
Right.
I can't stand it, but I do it. And I'm not very good at it because I'm lazy when it comes to commas, periods, and exclamation points.
Punctuation, what's it for, right?
I think the Oxford comma should have stayed on the other side of the Atlantic.
By the way, I wanted to mention to Frank, whatever. Prefer the name Francis myself, Francesco. You're bringing forth the Russian history. My friend has just returned from Russia with his Russian lady fair, and he has studied in depth because he's Orthodox, the church. And so I wrote a story about Saint Olga and the taking on of the Christian religion to keep from being enslaved by Byzantium. The Novgorod, the Garoarik, which means realms of towns, and it was Vlad, the son of Olga, that forged it into Kievan Rus, as they call it. Is this so, Francis?
I believe it is one of the later in the book when they get further east. The main character is a icon painter, and he does an icon related to that exact scenario that you were laying out.
I have to say, Saint Olga was brilliant in her movement to secure the safety and freedom of the Russian people by taking on the Christian church.
Yes, indeed.
I never realized it was that extent, you know.
All
Yeah,
right, so we have, oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, go ahead. That's all right. That's
I didn't mean to cut in. I just had another question come in. This is for all three of you again. This person wants to know, what's your favorite genre to read? Is it just historical fiction? Maybe Francis, you want to start us off with this one?
that's well, I'm a pretty eclectic reader. I read a lot of nonfiction, which kind of makes the transition to historical fiction a little easier. I read poetry. I write poetry because I have the attention span of a gerbil, and the poetry lends itself easier to my not sitting down for 20 hours like Daniel, and so I can jump back and forth. But no, I read across genres. I like some of the mystical stuff too. That's probably why there's a muse in this book. Well, in all three books, and and sort of also I like the classics and the muses. The muses are pretty important in classical literature, so it all kind of blends together. And it probably looks like it at times, but that's where he started.
Yeah, and I could definitely see that bridge between nonfiction to historical fiction being a short one, so that totally makes sense. What about you, Natalie? What's your favorite genre to read? And is it just historical fiction?
I read everything. I do really like historical fiction. I like feeling like I'm inhabiting a world I didn't know before. I like learning things and sort of feeling like I've like I said, you're part of something that you wouldn't be in your real life, but you're part of that historical context, which I think is great. But I read everything from that to domestic thrillers. So I love to read. I like to read all kinds of things.
Yeah, I mean, a good story is a good story, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of where I fall. What about you, Dan? What's your favorite genre to read?
Not to be funny, Robert Crumb's Head comics. Really enjoyed them when I was younger. I mean, it was a turning point as far as, well, shall we say, perception. So, yeah, religious books especially. You know, the bevy of man-made fables astounds me with such wonderful, shall we call it, fiction.
Yeah, I mean, I was definitely a big comics person too, so I am totally with you on that point.
Oh, yeah.
So,
Natalie, I have read a lot of Zane Grey and Louis L'Amour, so your book sounds very interesting to me as well, and
Yeah.
as well as Daniel, because I go to the Philippines, so it's so there's a lot of resonance here in the room.
yeah, definitely. And I'm kind of seeing that from not just the readings, but the way that you guys are kind of engaging with each other's questions too, is just really fantastic. And I just want to say at this point that it was really wonderful to be able to hear all three of you read from your books and share your thoughts, share the stories, of course, your answers to these questions. And thank you to everyone in the audience, of course, as well, for being here with us and celebrating these authors together. Don't forget that, of course, you can order Wolves and Empires, The Muse in a Time of Madness, and Sarita from the links in the chat. I'm just going to put those all in there one more time for everyone. And then please also consider checking out atmospherepress.com to browse our new and forthcoming releases, sign up for our email newsletter, or to submit a book manuscript of your own. You can submit your work to books@atmospherepress.com and just let us know that you attended today's event. So we'll look forward to hearing from you, but until then, that's it. So have a great rest of your week, everyone.
Thank you.
Do zidania.